you mentioned last night how impressed you were that Barrett Prettyman was probably one of the few, if not only, law clerks who actually served and worked with 3 justices. And then you immediately came back and said, I think Neal Rutledge, am the only guy to be shot at in the Supreme Court.
You're right.
You had everybody's attention, so tell me about that. Give us the story.
Sure, it's not a complicated story, and the only unique thing about it is the injunction of silence that Justice Black imposed because of his wife's illness.
So give us the background. About what time during the term? Was it the early part of the term? Or?
This, I'm trying to think. I would guess. I'm trying to think when she died. And it was right about the time that Mrs. Black died. Mm-hmm. So that would...
December.
Yeah, okay. There, that's good. And this happened maybe 2-3 weeks before she died, but she was at home, but she was under nursing care and was in bed. And you could tell, I mean, before any of this happened, we all knew that the judge was very disturbed about his wife's illness. Right. And he lived in Alexandria. And this was about somewhere around midnight. Sam Daniels had already gone home, so I was there alone. Mm-hmm. And the judge's chambers were out of, well, he had next to the Chief Justice, he was the senior justice, and he had a very nice suite of offices on the northeast corner of the building, mm-hmm. which is the back side. And his office was the corner office with windows looking both ways. And then we clerks, Sam Daniels and I, were in the office next to him, mm-hmm. farther south, and then his secretary and these terrific files he had. The secretary's office was loaded with file cases, 4-drawer file cases. And anything that we were working on, we frequently had to refer to those files. Mm-hmm. And particularly, what I was familiar with is his notes about what had gone on in the judicial conference, which is not recorded, and the only evidence you can ever get as to what goes on in that judicial conference is what a particular justice may say goes on, or what he kind of notes that he has. And Black, when you first start clerking for him, he tells us that he has these notes and that we are free to consult them anytime we want to, mm-hmm. but that they are distinctly confidential and they are not to be reproduced, and that we are not to talk about what he has recorded mm-hmm. there. In other words, he was trying to preserve the confidentiality of the judicial conference. Anyway, something I can't even remember, I was working on a case, mm-hmm. and it was close to midnight. And ordinarily, if the judge were there and in his chambers, I would go out into the corridor and then go to the secretary's office and go in through the main entrance there. And that was the way we would do it if he was there. If he was not there, it was quicker and easier to just go from my office into the judge's chambers and then into the secretary's office where the files were. And I was headed in there, and I opened the door and switched on the light, and was about halfway to the door when this shot came through the window. And I don't know whether I heard it or felt the breeze or what, but it seemed like the bullet just went right by my head. And I hit the deck and crawled out of there and immediately called down to the police, who were 2 levels down below where I was. And they immediately said, "I think I've just been shot at." And they came running up there, and then they immediately sent somebody out in the by the side of the building there where the shot had to come from.
So this was a shooter out on the Maryland Avenue side?
Let's see, Maryland Avenue is, yeah, I guess it is, yeah, on the north side, yeah. It'd be somebody, there was then, right now, if you look at it, they've got construction sheds around there, but
Right.
then it was quite open on that side.
Okay.
And you looked across, what is the YMCA or something, there's, hey, you got a nice bell? Go ahead and take it here if you want to.
John, if you want to.
Yeah, well, today it's the Hart Senate office building all the way across. 'Cause
Oh, yeah, over
it's
that way, yeah.
It's that Maryland
Yeah, here, I'll draw it for you.
Constitution.
Yeah. Yeah, here's the Capitol,
Right.
and here's the Supreme Court building.
Right.
The size is not proportionate, and then Black's office was here, and then clerks, and then here's the secretary's office.
Got it.
And it files. So if he were there, we'd go out in the corridor. There's a corridor here.
Right.
We'd go out there and go in like that.
Uh-huh.
But if he wasn't, and I was going, there's a door here and a door here.
Right.
And I was going there, and there's a window here. And that's where the shot came through.
Okay.
And we found it in the wall. The bullet was finally. We found the bullet. I think it was just.
Right.
It was a .22.
And it really was moments after you turned on the light, so there's somebody out there waiting, and the light goes on, and they fire a shot?
That's right. That's right. I turned on the light and was 2 or 3 steps in there, and the shot came through. So there was somebody out there on this side. Here, Maryland Avenue goes like that, doesn't it?
Yeah, Maryland kind of, I think,
Yeah.
goes like
Right.
that, and I think,
Yeah.
then it merges with, what is this, Constitution Avenue?
Right. That's right.
Yeah, and this is 2nd Street
Yeah.
back there.
That's right. And what is this street?
That's First.
First Street, yeah. So it had to be, and I think they found, I never saw it, but and my recollection is one of the cops said they found the footprint or something out there. This is all open
Right.
grass.
Now, could somebody have known that that was Justice Black? Or was it just some nut shooting at a Supreme Court window when the lights went on?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously somebody could have found out that was his chamber there on the corner, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't be readily available, but
Right.
and now Jackson's chambers are right down here.
Yeah, actually, as long as you're doing this great diagram, if you remember who was where.
Yeah, I remember Jackson was here. There he had 1, 2, and I don't think anybody else was down here.
Wasn't Burton somewhere over on that
I'm
side?
trying to think where Burton was. This is Jackson.
Okay.
I'm trying to think where Douglas was over here somewhere. Frankfurter. Boy, yeah. Now I'm,
Yeah, well, that's okay.
yeah.
Think about it in terms of your office. Who was your
Yeah,
neighbor?
I'm trying to think who, I think Frankfurter was here,
Okay,
I think. I'm not positive about that.
okay.
So Jackson, Frankfurter, Black,
Okay.
and
And had Black been there since 1937?
yeah, he was
Okay.
the first appointment.
Right.
And had he
nobody
been in that chamber?
office
No.
space? No. Okay.
No.
Did people move with seniority?
People moved with seniority.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
So a
And,
senior associate justice gets a corner.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And where was the chief?
And the chief was not, as I remember, the chief was sort of in the center back here.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, back in there.
Okay.
Now I've been up there in the last year, and John Paul Stevens, now who's,
The senior associate.
I guess he's the senior associate, and he has Black's chambers.
Right. Right.
And so he's in that corner now.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether they've got anybody up there. Is another floor above this. They may, and I think if you retire but keep an office there, Sandra Day O'Connor has. I think you go up one
Right.
floor. Yeah.
Was there anything
Yeah.
that Justice Black was particularly catching public heat for at the time you were a law clerk? I mean, if somebody was aggrieved and had a rifle, did they have a reason to be targeting him?
Yeah, I can't think of any particular thing that would have prompted that.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened, of course, was that I crawled in there and then called the police, and they came on up,
Mm-hmm.
and then sent somebody out here, and they never found anybody. And then we called Black, of course, to warn him that somebody might be after him.
Mm-hmm.
And
In the dead of night or the next?
and no, he's right then. Yeah,
Right
we
then,
called right
right
then.
then.
Yeah, said that. I talked to him at the time too. Just said, told him what had happened,
Mm-hmm.
and that a shot had come through the window, and it was in his chambers. And
they found a slug in the wall.
they found a slug in the wall. Yeah, and but his reaction, he was not alarmed that somebody was after him, which is what we all thought was not necessarily likely, but plausible and possible. But he was concerned about his wife, and he didn't want his wife to know anything about this because he thought it would get her upset and would have a bad effect on her health and condition. So he didn't want anybody from the police force there to call in the local police force. And he enjoined me severely that he did not want me to say anything about this to anybody. I was to be completely mum about it. I don't even remember telling Sam Daniels about it. I'm not sure whether he must have known about it eventually.
Mm-hmm.
But the only thing that came out in the press about it was about 2 or 3 weeks later in the Washington Post. And I think it was on page 1 of the Metro section, not on the first page of the paper. And I was amused by the headline on the article. It said, "The shot that was not heard round the world." and then they went in and said, "Rumor has it that somebody fired a shot into Justice Black's office at night. And we can't confirm it," and so forth.
No arrests, no further developments.
Nobody, no, so far as I know, nobody was ever arrested. Or I would have thought they would have called in the FBI and the local police, just particularly when they found the bullet. And maybe they did, and I didn't know about it. And then I didn't talk about it for years and years. I didn't talk about it as long as Black was alive, actually. Yeah.
Mrs. Black's health.
Mm-hmm.
What can you add on that situation?
Well, I had known her because my parents were friends with them, and we had occasional social interchange. I didn't know her well at all, but I did know her, and she seemed very charming. And I think the Black was quite devoted to her, and so far as I could see, they had a very stable marriage. But her health was not good, and
this is from the time your parents were friends, or from?
Well, even back then, I knew that she would get sick more frequently than normal, and then she'd be in bed for maybe a week or 10 days or something.
And the
and then we
nature
get
of the
better.
ailments, as you?
It never was clear to me what in the hell they were, I just don't know whether they were flu or what they were. Yeah.
And then as of the fall of '51, when you were a law clerk, what was the
Well,
situation?
then it became, as I was working for him, I started work. I clerked for Judge Fahey on the U.S. Court of Appeals for 1 year. And both of these appointments were not because of I had a perfectly good law school record. I didn't do law review because my father died and I needed the money, so I went to work for the New York, New Haven Harbor Railroad, loading freight cars.
Wow.
And rather than doing law review work. And, I'd worked for a year with Judge Fahey on the U.S. Court of Appeals, which is where my dad had been for a while. And then, I guess it was late June, July, I started with Black in '51.
How did that come about? The actual job offer, or?
Yeah, well, the job.
I mean, you were.
Yeah.
He knew you.
Oh yeah, he knew me.
You were Wiley Rutledge's son.
That's right. But he contacted John Frank, who was a professor. He was teaching at Yale Law School. And he'd been a good friend of the family. I'd known him from before my law school days, and then I took several courses with him, and Fowler Harper. Likewise, I had known for a while, and he was also a professor at Yale there. And I can't remember whether, I think it was, it might have been both of them. Anyway, Fowler Harper and or John Frank came to me and said that there was a possibility of my being able to clerk for the two courts that my father had served on, and was I interested? I said yes, I was very much interested. And then I think both Harper and John Frank had been sort of delegated to see whether I was up to the task of being a law clerk. And I remember taking a seminar with John Frank on the Supreme Court.
Took a seminar on, are you up to the task of being a Supreme
That's
Court law
right.
clerk?
There you go. And I got a good grade from that, and I think I convinced John Frank, and I think I convinced Fowler Harper too that I could possibly do the job without causing great embarrassment. And so, and Black had communicated with them, and so then, and Fahey too, and so then they told me to go ahead and contact both of them, and so I did. And the next time I was down in Washington, I went to see Judge Fahey, and also went to see Justice Black, and was hired.
At the start, you were hired by both of them.
Correct.
For the package.
For the package.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Was that totally uncommon? You kind of had a stepped process?
I think it was uncommon to be hired for an eventual opening in the Supreme Court before you'd done your clerking on the Court of Appeals.
Yeah.
Most of the guys that I know, most of them, I'm just trying to think in this class of 51, I would guess probably a majority of them had clerked for a Court of Appeals judge. I'm not sure. It's much more, maybe it became more common later, but it's very common that you come out of graduate clerk for a Court of Appeals judge, or maybe for a district court judge, but usually for the Court of Appeals, and then go on to the Supreme Court. But you usually don't know that you're going to get the Supreme Court job until later, whereas I had a pretty good assurance that I was.
Right.
Yeah.
We asked this question, you have a follow-up on that?
Well, I mean, Charlie Heilman had a stepped process too, and it was pretty close to yours, but I don't think the clerkship with Burton was ironclad at the time he took the Third Circuit clerkship. It was It was an Owen Roberts brokered sequence, and a likelihood that clerking for Judge Goodrich would lead to clerking for Justice Burton.
Exactly.
But I don't think quite a.
It wasn't quite something as firm as I.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Speaking of Charlie, we did ask him a question.
Yeah.
That, during the term, as you experienced the term, if there were a judge that you would have liked to have worked for other than, in this case, Hugo Black, who would that be?
Well, that's an interesting question. Well, I certainly would put Jackson up there, and I would put Frankfurter.
Why Jackson?
Well, he was, as I say, I got to know Bill Rehnquist fairly well, because our offices were adjoining here, and I could see, I could observe through him the relationship that he had with Jackson, and I thought it was a pretty good one. And Frankfurter always treated his clerks quite well, I thought, although he kept them very busy doing appendices and so forth. Let's see, I'm trying to think. Fred Vinson, I had known from going way back when he was serving on the U.S. Court of Appeals the same time my father was. So I had met him just incidentally during that time. And I liked him. I would include him in there too as somebody who, when my father had he had a cerebral hemorrhage, and he was in Maine. It was the end of his summer vacation. He died in early September. But Vincent was very helpful in terms of getting our doctor up there and everything of that sort. So I'd say now Reed, who I knew fairly well too, but Reed that year, this year, Stanley Reed had, he was a tall man, but he'd put on quite a lot of weight. And he took time off in the early part of this term and went down to the Duke, I don't know what they call it, but there's a clinic down at Duke University for people that have weight problems. They used to put you on a rice diet.
Right.
And anyway, he went down there and was extremely successful. I remember seeing him before he went down there, and I don't know how long he was there, 6 weeks or something. And he came back and he looked like a different man. He'd lost a tremendous amount of weight. And but all this had an effect on him. Now, he outlived everybody else on the court there. But the last, I don't know, for many years there towards the end, and his mind had gone. And he was what I consider the worst fate for an old person is to, your body goes on, your mind's gone. And they had to institutionalize him somewhere up in New York. I think somewhere around New York City. Yeah. This term, now I'm trying to think who his two clerks. Here, let's see. Here, let's see. Here we go. Jack Calhoun, and both Lou Green and Jack Calhoun are now dead. Jack died fairly early. He was at Cravath, Swain and Moore in New York City, and then I'm not sure whether he'd clerked at the Court of Appeals level or not, but then he was a Yale Law graduate, and I'd known him at law school. He was an upperclassman, and we had this year together. And then he went, when he finished with Reed, he went back to Cravath, Swain and Moore. And then I got to know him quite well again because 2 or 3 years later, I was with Claude Pepper Law Offices, and Pepper was hired to try a big case down there in Tallahassee. And I got assigned as the liaison between Cravath, Swain and Moore. Is a great way to experience a Wall Street firm, by the way. So I went up to New York at the expense of Bethlehem Steel was the client, and stayed at any hotel I wanted to. I just stayed a number of them, and then went on in to work at Cravath, Swain and Moore. And John wasn't working on the case, but we continued our friendship, and I got even closer with him then. But it wasn't long after that, a couple of years, that he'd been working late there, like around midnight or 2, and then was driving back to wherever he lived, which is, I don't know, somewhere.
Long Island.
Long Island, I think it was, right, and had an automobile accident that killed him. And then Lou Green was from St. Louis, and I went out after our clerking days, and we didn't. He and some other people that we knew jointly went down in the Ozarks and did a canoe camping trip together and everything. And I hadn't realized that Lou had died. I don't know how long ago he did die. I think it's fairly recent.
2003.
Yeah, there you go.
As you're combing these justices and flashing back to Jackson for a second, are there any vignettes, any stories? Did you have any interface with him personally?
With who?
Jackson.
Nothing that I can think of except to shake hands
Right.
and to say hello and
What kind of an acquaintance had you had with him in the period where he was your father's colleague?
I'd been introduced to him, and I don't remember ever seeing him at our house or ever going to his house, but I had met him several times.
Your
and,
parents lived where? Up in Spring Green?
we lived in Spring Valley.
Spring Valley, right?
Yeah,
Right.
which is out Massachusetts Avenue.
Yep.
Hmm.
Okay.
And
What was their relationship? Your father and Jackson.
I think it was good.
Mhm.
They particularly. I'm trying to think of the cases that were going on when my father was appointed to the court in 1943. He went on in early 43 February, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
And they had these from West Virginia. What are the?
Burnett.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
There
The Jehovah's Witnesses.
several cases.
Right.
Yeah, right. And Dad's vote changed the result. I mean, the court turned around on that. Yeah.
Right.
I'm not sure how Jackson voted on that. Was he with Frank Pritter?
No. He
That's
was
what
with
I
majority.
thought. That's what I
Because
thought.
He joined the court in 41.
That's right.
Gobitis was 1940.
There you go.
So Jackson in 41.
There you
Rutledge
go.
in 43.
Yeah.
Jackson
There you
actually
go.
writes it. He
That's
writes
right.
it for the court.
And and they were together on
Right.
that.
Yeah.
That's my memory.
And it's
Yeah.
Black and Murphy and Douglas who switch.
Who switch? There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
And, no, I know my father had a lot of respect for Jackson, and that early experience when he first went on the court,
okay.
I think
it-
impressed him.
Did it cool, or were there bumpier stretches later?
There might have been some cooling later. I'm not. See, it later went on. I went off to college,
Right.
and then in the Marine Corps,
Right.
and then off to law school. So I really wasn't there to judge it the way I had been in high school. Yeah.
There are, there are some divisions in that court, that
Oh, you bet.
early Vincent court,
That's right.
and the quartet, the Black, Douglas, Rutledge, Murphy quartet,
That's right.
and Jackson and Felix
That's
sometimes
right.
on the other side.
Right.
There's some harsh
That's right.
stuff, including
That's
in
right.
private papers,
I'm sure there is.
going both directions.
Yeah. I doubt that you'd find anything in my father's papers that would
There are a
be.
few.
You think so?
John Farron has a few in his book.
Does he? Okay.
Little
Okay.
Rutledge jabs at Jackson.
All right. Yeah.
And there are some things in Jackson papers that are
That are jabs back.
at,
Sure.
back at various people.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's a dangerous thing for historians to find nuggets, because the urge is to
Oh, sure. Do
see
exactly.
too much
Yeah.
in something because
Exactly.
you find it on paper.
Exactly. Mhm.
Was there any? Do you have any memory of Jackson at the time of your father's passing? You must have been helping your mother and dealing with,
Oh, yeah.
Obviously condolences and her
Oh, yes.
prayers and so forth.
Yes. Mhm.
Do you remember Jackson being?
I remember what memory I have of that is that he was sympathetic and cordial and helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, we're 2-3 years later, when you're a law clerk, he's, he knows you're Wiley's son, obviously.
Sure.
Working next door.
Right.
Would you see him in the hallway?
Yeah, I would see him in the hallways. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Were the justices, was his style, or justices generally, inclined to converse with law clerks in the hallway, or was there a walk on past?
Well, no, yeah, you'd say hi or something, or maybe you'd make a joke, and I mean, I didn't know the Truman appointees nearly as well as I knew the Roosevelt ones going back. And but I remember I did know Vincent.
We were talking, I mean, I think the geography makes it so interesting and makes you such an important witness to the Jackson-Black relationship during that 51 term. Do you remember interaction moments, seeing them together?
Not very much. I've been searching my memory on that, and I didn't see a lot of Jackson. I saw a fair amount of Bill Rehnquist, and I can't think of the name of his color. I didn't see the other Jackson clerk too much for some reason.
Niebank, right?
Niebank, yeah. George is
Right.
in it, yeah. Right.
Did Black have a style of visiting other justices' chambers?
To a certain extent, but not a great deal. I didn't. Now, Frankfurter was all over the place.
Right. He was his own category.
That's right. He was his own category. Frankfurter's all over the place. Douglas, you seldom saw, going from chamber to chamber. The others, Black did to a certain extent, but not nearly to the extent that Frankfurter did.
Okay. In the tradition, I guess, of the clerkship year, the lunches with the individual justice.
Right.
Were those spread out across the year?
They were spread out across the year.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't remember how soon they got started. I don't think, well, of course, the court didn't convene
Right.
until the first, what is it, the first Monday after the first Tuesday, or what is it? It's
Yeah. It's well, no, I think it's just the first Monday. It can be as
the
early
first
as
Monday in
1.
October, yeah.
Right.
And
Labor Day is the first Monday after the first Tuesday. But the
there
first
you go.
Monday in October is just the first Monday in
You're
October.
okay.
I think the Jackson lunch with the clerks was pretty late in the year.
I think that's right.
Do you remember?
I'm trying to think back on that, and my memory, I mean, I remember it happened, but I don't remember very much about it,
Okay.
which is terrible.
Okay, no.
What I'm impressed with in this experience here is how getting a group together, you stimulate each other's memories. And now how accurate that is another matter. But
But then you try to connect it up with a paper trail and
Yeah.
Calendars, and you can document some of it.
some of it, that's
Yeah.
right, yeah.
And when two people who have refreshed each other's recollections remember something that a third person also remembers,
Yeah,
then I can
then
feel
you
pretty confident
absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah.
when you guys late at night over a bourbon convince each other of something, that's different.
That's a little different. Okay.
Mrs. Black, Josephine Black, and
Yeah.
the decline during that fall of 1951. Were the other justices aware of what
I'm
Hugo Black was dealing with?
I'm sure they were. Yeah.
Okay. And was she hospitalized? Was that the situation?
I think she was in the hospital for a briefer period, but she was at home and in bed for long periods of time, and they had nursing care for her there. And that's where she died, I think. It was at home in bed, yeah.
What was your understanding then of the nature of the ailment, the condition, or the?
It never came through clearly what it was. I didn't think it was cancer. Now this is something that's a little speculation on my part, that there was some depression, a mental phase of it. And whether that's true or not, I don't know. But there was speculation about that at the time. And my mother knew her reasonably well. But nobody ever gave me an exact diagnosis of what it was that she had. Although it's clear to me that Black was terribly worried about her dying. And
Would he say that?
Well, no, but that came through from the shooting incident, that he did not want this to hit the newspapers, and that he was very much concerned about her mortality.
Okay.
And I'd have to. Do you have the date of her death? It's
It's December.
December. Yeah.
First half of December.
First half of December. Okay. So the shooting probably was in November.
Okay. And explain that connection to his fear of her dying.
The connection was simply that she was in bed. She was being taken care of by nurses at home. He was very concerned about her condition. He did not want her to be troubled by reading about somebody trying to shoot him.
Okay.
And
But if she had learned about somebody
trying to
shoot him, how could that
impact her?
impact her in a way that could be fatal?
I don't think that would have. He wasn't saying that would cause her to die. That would be the cause of her death. But he just felt that it would have an adverse effect on her condition.
Okay. December 7,
December 7,
1951.
anniversary of Pearl Harbor.
Ironically, yeah. It's a Friday. It's an argument week, but Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, the court hears arguments. Friday, it wasn't hearing any cases.
Mm-hmm. And they still had their Saturday conference in those days.
Right. Yeah.
Which they gave up. They gave that up later.
Right. And so it's the following Monday when the court takes the bench. Chief Justice Vinson announces that the court will, transact no business because of the death of Mrs. Black, and then it's that Monday afternoon that her funeral is held up at All Souls Unitarian Church, 16th and Harvard.
Right,
So
that's
sort of
where.
up in Adams Morgan, up 16th Street, past the park.
And that's where my father's funeral was held, also.
Okay.
A. Powell Davies, I think. I'm not sure. I think he was still the. A. Powell Davies was the pastor there.
Yes, yeah, he delivers the
eulogy. Yeah.
which I think was ghostwritten, or material was supplied by John Frank.
I didn't know that, but that rings a bell. I mean, yeah, right.
And I think beautiful material. So
Right.
A eulogy that communicated the personal.
John had a very close personal relationship with him, and.
Do you remember how you learned of her death? I mean, would it have been that Friday or?
Phew, wow. It would have been probably that Friday. Yeah, it was Friday the day she died.
Friday was the day she died, and Monday is the funeral.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure, I'm reasonably sure, no, I'm not sure, I'm speculating, but I believe that both Sam and I learned about it either in the office there, either Friday or Saturday morning. I'm not sure what time she died.
It's a little mysterious.
Hmm?
It's a little mysterious. I think there's not, part of it is just the discretion of the media, and part of it was that the information was not very
just
much
wasn't there.
disseminated.
Exactly.
So it's very cryptic.
Yeah.
Hugo Jr. wrote a book, My Father, a memoir of the Justice.
Right.
And he's got a version.
What does he say?
He says that he was in town visiting, and that Justice Black was home because the court was not in session on Friday, that Josephine, Mrs. Black, was sleeping late or staying in her room. And at some point late in the morning, a maid or a nurse or somebody goes to check, and finds her
Dead.
There's also a time.
So that would be late. It'd be in the morning sometime then,
Late
presumably.
morning, and then I think by the time the doctor comes and
Right.
it's officially there's a time of 1:30 in the afternoon as a time of death.
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I'm not positive that we learned about it right away.
Okay. Do you remember going to the house at
I
any
do.
point during the
I think we did. Yeah.
grieving period or the?
Yeah, I do remember that.
Okay. What was your understanding of why she died? How she died?
From some kind of an illness that never was really specified. I mean, it wasn't TB. It wasn't a heart. Nobody said heart attack. Nobody said TB. Nobody said cancer. And nobody asked very many questions.
She's a relatively young woman. I think she's about 51, 52 at the time.
No, I had thought, let's see, I'm trying to think. My mother at that time, Black was older than Dad by a few years. My father was born in 1894.
Right.
And my mother was born in 1888. And so this makes it 50, 60, she was 63 years old.
She was younger. He married as a man in his 30s.
That's right, and she was considerably younger than,
a girl in her 20s.
Yeah. But let's see, Annabelle, my mother, was 63, so she could be in her middle 50s, I would guess.
Okay. I mean, I'm not trying to be indiscreet, but it connects to Jackson having a real sympathy for Hugo.
Yeah, very much
so.
so.
I'm focusing on it. Suicide?
The thought ran through all our minds.
Okay.
The possibility of suicide.
Okay. Discussed?
Not discussed.
Not discussed. Okay.
Not that I can remember it certainly wasn't discussed with Black. Whether Sam and I probably maybe discussed it, said this is a possibility.
Were you a friend of Hugo Jr. or Sterling or JoJo?
I knew them all. I got to know Sterling much better when I went out to New Mexico because that's where he was. And I got to know Hugo much better after his father died than I did before or at that time. But I did now. Hugo was at he was a class. I'm not sure whether he was a year or 2 years ahead of me at Yale. So I did get to know him at Yale Law School. And then Hugo went down to practice with the firm that Abner was mentioning that he worked with in Birmingham, Alabama, to represent the steelworkers and so forth. And when I went to practice with Claude Pepper in Miami, Florida, I started representing the steelworkers in Florida through that Birmingham office, and then they were with, what's his name, the guy that argued in the Seizure case, with Arthur Goldberg, yeah.
In that, I mean, the court's a small family, and this is a big tragedy. Do you have any memories of other justices at the home or at the funeral or at Arlington or condolences?
As my memory serves me, they certainly were, well, as far as I could tell, they were all there at the church service at the Unitarian Church.
Right.
And I think when my wife and I called at his house a couple times. I think one or two of them might have been there.
Mm-hmm. Does Jackson, do you remember Jackson specifically in any of that context?
I don't. I don't. Mm-hmm.
Okay. You're very good about not letting me lead you to false answers. I appreciate that. I don't want to suggest, you know.
Well, lead on, however.
And I also apologize for this. I don't mean to have a series of morbid questions, but can I ask a bit about your father's passing?
Sure.
In that, you know,
Sure.
that sort of time period.
Yeah.
You know, the court's in recess during the summer of '49,
Mm-hmm.
and let's start with Murphy. Was Murphy in failing health as anybody understood it?
Not certainly. I didn't have any inkling that he was in failing health, and he was engaged to get married. He was a formal engagement, and I didn't hear anything at all came to my attention about his being in ill health.
Okay.
And then I'm not sure. I don't think he died in Washington. I think he died up in Michigan.
He died in Michigan.
And I assume it was a heart attack again. I don't know, but it was a quick, sudden thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I know my father went up for the funeral, of course, and he was very much affected by that, because he and Murphy were very close.
Right. Who was the fiancée?
I should know her name. I have known her name. Because of my old age, I can't come up with it.
So, and during the summer, was your father in Maine the whole time?
Not the whole time. I'm not sure. When he always wanted to go back out to Colorado, and my mother felt that well, he was heavily involved out there because he'd gone to law school there and he'd taught at the law school there, and he knew a lot. Anytime they went out there, he got involved with quite a lot of people that he saw and so forth, and she felt it was better for my father to be somewhere else where he could just relax and not be involved that way.
Right.
And so they had gone several years before. They'd gone for several years to a very nice cottage that she'd located, or he had, or they had, in Ogunquit, Maine,
Okay.
which is not far up. It's just sort of over the border.
Okay.
But it's right, right on the ocean. Beautiful place.
Right.
And they had a little summer theater there that put on plays, or different play every week, 10 days, something. It was very nice. And that's where they were. They had, I was in New Haven, and at that time we had gone up and been in Maine with them for a week or something like that. But well, when he died September 10th or something around there.
Well, had he been there at the time? Murphy dies July 19th.
Correct.
Did your father go from Maine to Detroit?
No, I don't think so. I think he went from Washington to Detroit.
Okay.
And then
So then
back
later,
to, I think there was a ceremony in Washington for Murphy,
Okay.
as well as one up there. And he attended both.
Okay.
And Murphy was Catholic. And so they were not in Ogunquit at that time. They'd gone up later. And
So they're up there in August. The press reports August 22 that your father's been stricken with a circulatory ailment. That's the first thing.
okay, that's the first news thing.
Yeah.
What had happened was I was not there, but my mother said they had gone to some kind of a picnic, a local picnic. I don't know whether it was a church thing or what it was, but anyway. And they had all kinds of, like they have out here, all kinds of food and buffet and so forth. And that she thought that Dad had just eaten more than he should have, that they came back from that So this is in the evening. It was an evening meal. And he was feeling uncomfortable. And then later that evening, he was stricken with, she didn't know what it was, but it was later diagnosed as a cerebral hemorrhage.